And welcome back to the Cover 3 podcast here on CBS Sports. That's Bud Elliott. I'm Chip Patterson. National Signing Day 2021, the conclusion of the 2021 recruiting cycle. We do still have a few stragglers out there. You know, you've got some that will be committing later in the week. I know we've got a couple Friday commitments that are still hanging out there. You've also got the number one prospect in the class who has not set a date based on my understanding. We're just assuming later this spring for defensive lineman JT Tuimoloau. And as we're sort of putting the pieces back together, there's a couple different places to start. Bud, you've got a winners and losers column available on cbssports.com that all the listeners, if you have not seen it already, should absolutely go and check out. We got some storylines that sort of have continued and paid off in ways that we might have predicted if you listen to our signing day storylines coming into the day. I want to start with the obvious because it sometimes gets a little bit dramatic and might not be until a 2 p.m. announcement, might not be until a 3 or 4 p.m. announcement that you feel like you can declare the number one class for that year. Right? Like, you know, especially if it's one of those years where I remember back in, 2013, 14, 15, like if USC was in the mix, you had a West Coast guy. But not only were we able to solidify Alabama as the number one class in this 2021 cycle, but we were able to solidify that Alabama had the highest rated class ever. The entire 24/7 sports database library, the recruiting rankings era. And it happened when Kamar Wheaton put pen to paper, which was like at 10 a.m., right? Eastern time. I mean, Kamar Wheaton, there was maybe some whispers that I guess Oklahoma was trying to get in there a little bit late. But, man, talk about just sort of playing out the string in terms of the drama of these announcements. Alabama does, Bud, what you set up could happen. They beat the 2010 Florida recruiting class, loaded on the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball, highest rated class to this point. And the thing that stands out the most to me is not necessarily how easily it went down, but that across this class, their player average is like 96. I mean, there's no bad choices in terms of a prospect within this class. Stupid.
Yeah, Chip, you nailed it. This is not a quantity over quality thing. This is a all quality and a whole lot of quantity of that quality in this class. So Alabama does have the number one recruiting class of all time. As of this recording, they could even add to it, by the way, if Terron Arnold elects to sign with the Tide coming up in a couple hours, the 5-star safety out of Tallahassee, who is down to Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. Or if JT, our number one player in the top 247 defensive end out of Seattle, if he decides to pick Alabama, they could certainly add to it again there. And I know they would take him. But the balance in this class it's just stupid. They have the top two offensive tackles in the country, J.C. Latham and Tommy Brockermeyer. They have the number two guard, Terrence Ferguson, who they got out of Georgia. They got the number one center, James Brockermeyer, who are both Texas legacies. Right. And, I mean, now that Kyle Flood and Steve Sarkisian are at Texas, if you hit them with the truth serum, I wonder how they feel about it. They probably feel pretty good about their choice because of how well Nick Saban does at developing talent. But they get 4 top 10 receivers so far in Ja'Cory Brooks, Ajay Hall, Christian Leary, and JoJo Earl. And then they get the number 2 running back, as you mentioned, in Kamar Wheaton. This is nuts. Every single class that Nick Saban has signed in Tuscaloosa has gone on to win the national title in at least one of their 4 years.
9. I think Nick Saban's got 9 number one recruiting classes and 7 national championships.
6 of the top 10 all time. This year, he has 15 of the top 91 players in the country. That's like 1 in 6.
Oh my gosh.
7 5-stars already. We're not even done with today.
There's one thread that you mentioned there with Brockmeyer that I wanted to pull on, and especially, like you mentioned with Steve Sarkisian taking over. So in this class, there are 7 blue chip players from the state of Texas, including 4 of the top 15 in the state. Now, Alabama going into Texas is not new right? I mean, we've got like Jalen Hurts is from Texas. Jalen Waddle's from, right? Jalen Waddle from Texas
Yep.
as well.
Yes, he is.
Like they have, it's not that far. It is part of the regional footprint. And with the talent rich state that Texas can be, the fact that Alabama, the top recruiting program in the sport, going in there is not a huge surprise. But is this like even unique? And is this last call for an Alabama and maybe even an Ohio State to be able to continue to have that advantage that they have in Texas? Do you see the new Longhorn staff maybe having an impact where that's not going to be there as much for Alabama in the future?
I don't. I don't think this is the last call at all. I mean, look, Tom Herman came into Texas with more fanfare than Steve Sarkisian did, and Nick Saban and Urban Meyer and Ryan Day said, "I don't care. I'm going down to the Longhorn State and taking what I want to take." Jimbo Fisher came in there, tries to keep the guys in state, has done a good job. Still, Alabama and Ohio State come in there and they do a really good job of taking who they want. They land Ohio State lands Donovan Jackson. Alabama lands the Brockermeyer twins and Kamara Wheaton and JoJo Earl. It's pretty crazy. And if you flip the page to next year, Ohio State already has the number one quarterback in the country in Quinn Ewers and the number one receiver in the country in Caleb Burton, both of whom are from Texas.
Stupid.
Not slowing down.
All right, so one more thread from this that I know I want to ask, and if there's other pieces to this Alabama class that you want to point out, let's definitely get there. So a discussion on the 24/7 Sports show, Josh Pate, Steve Wiltfong, Trey Scott, all helped hold my hand. You got me prepped, but as I'm going through my day, that was my number one go-to spot. That was what I had up on the screen to be able to follow the rhythms of the day. And during some of the downtimes, you're just kicking around topics. And I believe Trey, he said, okay, for my money, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said the 2017 Alabama class, like that might be the gold standard, not only in terms of it was highly rated, but what that class went on to do, the players they ended up becoming, and that is Jerry Jeudy, Ruggs, Devonta Smith, Najee Harris, Alex Leatherwood, Dylan Moses, Tua Tagovailoa, Mac Jones as well. So they got 2 national championships and 1 runner-up, finishing in the national championship game with a loss to Clemson. Do you think that the 2020 class can accomplish as much as the 2017 class? Because while the 2020 class right now is the highest rated recruiting class of all time, I feel like they are immediately going to be trying to live up to a standard that has been set by this 2017 class, which might be the most accomplished or one of the most accomplished recruiting classes of all time.
So if you're a betting man, which I am, I would say that they absolutely can live up to it. Now, will they? Look, it's always unlikely that you're going to go in there and win multiple national titles and produce multiple Heisman winners. That's just typically doesn't happen. But I would say ultimately, not likely that they're able to pull that off. But then again, do you really want to bet against Nick Saban when you're giving him the most amount of raw talent that he's ever signed in a single class? I don't.
Yeah, I don't. Like I guess we were talking in a meeting recently. It's like, when's Nick Saban going to retire? I don't know. If I'm Nick Saban and I've just signed this recruiting class, I've got at least 3 to 4 more years where I would like to see what this class can become, because it certainly has all the makings of being able to accomplish as much. Anything else from the Alabama class that really stood out to you?
Not really. In looking back at the 2017 class, maybe one thing. That class did not turn out to be as good of a defensive football class than some of the other ones have. That class was primarily carried by offense. There were some good defensive players, but you also had some dudes along the defensive line and in the front seven kind of flame out. And I think this class has nice depth on the defensive side of the ball, but it's still very much offensive focused. So we'll have to see if the defensive side can live up to its end of the bargain, but I think it probably will.
There was an interesting narrative and storyline to track, which has been there's so many tentacles to it in terms of the impact of the pandemic and on this COVID season and this COVID recruiting cycle. But the what it has done for coaches truly seems to be the old phrase is year 0. And we're not just seeing it with a Shane Beamer at South Carolina. Like, we're also seeing it with the coaches who were year one coaches already. I think Florida State finished or is sitting as we're recording like around 30 or something. Like, is Mike Norvell, seems like it was an uphill battle for him. I mean, he's going to the transfer portal. He's trying to address some needs. Certainly Mackenzie Milton's the headliner right there. And there's a few other players that I think are going to allow the Seminoles to have a little bit more on-field success. But I mean, could you find any year one, year zero, year two coach? Like, it seems as though everyone who is not entrenched with those built-in relationships with the high school coaches around, it looked like it was an uphill battle for pretty much everybody.
Yeah, you really nailed it, Chip. And I think you have to separate year one from year two. Like your year zero, who are the guys who just got hired in the last 2 months, and then your year one, the guys who were hired, within the last year or so. Those are guys who really struggled this year because they never had a chance to go out and meet these guys in person. If you were lucky, you had maybe 1 or 2 junior days in January, February, March, where you had some kids get up to your campus. But you due to when the pandemic hit, you were never able to get off campus. I mean, how many of these kids in Florida State's class have ever met Mike Norvell in person? I bet you less than half.
Wow.
Right. I mean, and that's, they have, what are they? I think they're the second highest recruiting class of anybody who whose first season was 2020. And they're at 17. They're 22nd right now. They have 17 commits, average player rating of 88.5, which I think is probably the highest of any of the coaches out there.
Are they second behind Ole Miss?
19th, but 87, because they have 24 kids. What we saw was because of these lack of relationships, a lot of these staffs purposely went and they decided not to sign a whole bunch of kids. And I've been writing about this really since April, right? When we realized this pandemic thing might be pretty serious. And the word we were getting was, hey, why do I want to make a potential 4-year mistake on a kid that I've never seen? I've never worked out, right? I don't know what he's like in person. I don't know if he's a quitter or if he's somebody who wants to grind and strain through stuff. When I could take a kid who may not have as high of a ceiling, right? But I know he at least knows how to compete at the college level. He knows how to practice at the college level. He knows how to show up, how to work out, how to eat. He may not be a superstar, but he's going to help me fill a hole on my roster. We saw a lot of these guys who are year zero, year one coaches do this. Florida State signed 17. Washington with Jimmy Lake, they took 15. Auburn took just 14 as of this recording. South Carolina only has 12 kids as of this recording. And look, they'll add 1 or 2 more. I think most of these classes will that I just mentioned. FSU may be done high school wise, but you're talking about some of these schools electing to go 50% high school, 50% transfer. Nobody who's a year zero or year one coach signed a top 15 class this year.
Wow.
That's pretty wild.
And Ole Miss at number 19 is your is all coming from the December signing day was one of the big stories and remains one of the big stories, right? I mean, that's like the fact that Lane Kiffin has been able to do that not only with the hurdles of being a year one coach, but it sure seems like they've made waves, and I didn't see too much that would sway us one way or another, though. Obviously, I know they've got one big fish left on the board that probably would change, if nothing else, how they feel about the day. But I mean, this is still a really good Rebels class, right?
It is a good Rebels class. So if you look historically, they're at what, 19 right now? I think you said.
Yes.
If you pull it up historically, where is Ole Miss, right? When they were recruiting like crazy under Hugh Freeze, they signed classes that were 8th, 5th, but then they also had 2 that were 15th and 17th mixed in there. More recently, due to some of the probation stuff, 31, 32, 22, 34. So this is certainly, a step in the right direction. It's also fair to note that this is a bit of a volume class, right?
Where you mentioned 17 or 18, aren't they at like 26?
They're at 24, and they're also taking a transfer. They're still very much in it, and maybe the favorite for Tywone Malone, who's going to sign with somebody about 2 hours after we finish recording this. but they did do a really nice job down the stretch, right? I think Lane Kiffin successfully established an identity of a fast-paced, exciting offense. He garnered some attention by wearing the Mary Flipmas shirt. They managed to flip Luke Altmaier, from the team we were just talking about, Florida State and Mike Norvell. I think Dink Jackson is a solid get for them in their 3-safety defense out of the state of Florida. And, Braylon Brown's a nice receiver as well. They have some solid players. MJ Daniels as well, a very nice safety who we like a lot at 24/7 Sports. So they've done a nice job there. It is kind of tough to be in that division, but it's always been tough to be in that division. I mean, they're one of their better classes in their history this year, and they're not in the top 15, and they're staring up, and 3 other teams in their division are recruiting like gangbusters.
Speaking of historical averages, Wisconsin, we talk about Alabama having the top rated class in, the whole 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings era. Wisconsin, with its best class in Wisconsin recruiting history within that 24/7 Sports, that database, that recruiting rankings era. And the thing that I absolutely love about it is that we got just like and we knew some of this going into the day, but we just have 3 stud offensive linemen right at the top of the class. We're going 6'8", 295, number 15 player in the country. We're going 6'7", 285, number 1 player out of the state of Wisconsin. And we're going 6'7", 290, number 1 player out of the state of Minnesota. When we talk about beefing them up and bowling them over, this is take me into the numbers about why this is, one of the higher rated class, the highest rated Wisconsin class. And, or do you like it? Does it seem to lead you one way or the other in terms of expectations for the Badgers moving forward? Is this something where Wisconsin leveled up for a year because they had a couple of, in-state, couple connections, there's some family connections within this class. What was your read on the Badgers?
Hell yeah, I like it, Chip. I mean, this is their highest rated class ever. Right. Their previous highly rated class, I believe, was 29th or 26th. So they are blowing away their prior mark. They're finally taking some of that success that we see on the field and, turning it into recruiting success, which, assuming that they're still getting the right kind of guys, that, the OKGs that fit what they want to do, that's pretty big. Nolan Rucci, as you mentioned, there was a family connection there that they beat out Penn State for that 5-star offensive tackle, 6'8", 295. Out of Pennsylvania, but his brother is a tight end on the team. And in the pandemic, where else are you going to go but the place that you like, because your brother says, hey, I play here. It's real. The coaches are good to me. And that's extra comforting for him. They did a couple other good things that I do like. They recruited their own backyard very well in a year that was pretty talented for the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin normally does not have this many sort of medium to high 4-star type players. And Wisconsin cleaned up within its own state this year, did a nice job of that. They also recruited very well, within the Big Ten. They got TJ Bowlers from Iowa, right? They got Marcus Allen from Ohio. They got Jake Ratzlaff from Minnesota and another good kid from Minnesota. And certainly Minnesota would have liked to have those players. Ohio State doesn't really recruit Ohio quite as much as they used to, although they did a nice job with the very top kids there. But there are nice prizes to be had in Ohio if you're in sort of that kind of 12 to 20 range as a recruiter. And those are the type of kids Ohio State's probably not going to take, but you can get in there and you can make a good living doing that, much like Kentucky has at some point. So Wisconsin certainly this year is a team that has shined, and they are starting to pull away a little bit talent-wise from the rest of the West.
And it felt like I heard Minnesota mentioned as being in the running for a few of the guys. And look, the general, the caliber of athlete that we were tuned in for the announcements for, it wasn't a bunch of 5-stars. I mean, it was a bunch of 4-star guys. It was a bunch of guys that were between, Penn State, Minnesota, and Washington. I guess that would be Devon Townley, right? Who ended up going with Penn State. Yep. And he made a point he said, I want to thank Minnesota in particularly, that coaching staff. They were really good to me. It was interesting just to reframe the battles that seem to be going on with 217 of the top 247 players gone. We're not dealing with as many of the big dogs who are flipping between Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia hats. It is a lot of seemingly important program development guys who are going to come in and take somebody in that 15 to 20, 25 range and hopefully be really, really good in a couple years.
No, you're exactly right about that. They're doing a good job, and this was a hard year for everybody, right? And it's a weird year to judge. You really need to dig into each class individually and think, okay, what were the circumstances surrounding this? What were their goals? Or are they a team that is sort of in win now mode? Are they trying to plug some holes, or do they have the support from their administration to go all high school and no transfers? There's a lot of factors to consider.
Coming up on the other side, Jimbo Fisher, famous for being a good closer. How did Texas A&M close, and what is that class starting to look like for the Aggies, who are in the number 5 spot in the final college football playoff rankings and a number 4 spot in the final AP poll? It's a national title contender down there in College Station. What does the future look like for the Aggies, and more storylines, winners and losers with Bud Elliott next. So L.J. Johnson is committed to Texas A&M. You mentioned Texas A&M is also in the running for Tywan Malone. That'll be coming up a little bit later. That's a Texas A&M or Ole Miss. Am I just pulling that from like the old Barton Simmons, the old Barton Simmons library of like taglines? Because he put in my head that Jimbo Fisher is a good closer, and with your long,
no, he is.
Okay, all right. So that is not totally misguided. That I just like ran with. That's what goes into that. What makes Jimbo Fisher a good closer and allows him to be able to step in at Texas A&M and still be able to have that reputation, still be able to keep that thing going in your eyes?
Well, I think a lot of it is, building relationships, right? And maintaining those relationships, showing proof of concept. Look, we've spoken a lot about how A&M's offense, their passing game, explosion wise, was atrocious the last 3 years, really, since he's been there. But one thing that has been consistent is A&M has had a very good run game, an explosive run game, and L.J. Johnson is a guy who just saw A&M's offensive line be one of the best in college football this year, and they give the ball to their backs a lot. You can be a running back and get 20-plus carries a game at Texas A&M. They're kind of old school in that way, and that certainly has its appeal to running backs. So then landing L.J. Johnson was a big deal today. They managed to beat out Texas. I think that's an important one, no doubt. And that's going to take their class. And let's see, have we updated our overall rankings yet? Looks like he's not been added into that, but he is in their class. So we'll see when the overall rank is. I'll keep hitting refresh, but my guess is that they will pass USC here and jump up to 7th, which would be an awesome, if they finish there, another top 10 class for Texas A&M with the potential to go higher with, like you said, Tywan Malone coming. By the way, guys, we're on Spotify, and we are trying to hit a certain number of Spotify subscribers. So make sure to hit us up on Spotify. Spotify is a great app for podcasts, and it's not just music. Podcasts are on there. I love to use it. I can switch between my music and my podcasts whenever I want. Hit us up on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe.
Follow us and stream. Follow us and stream our podcasts on Spotify. You mentioned USC. Man, this kind of felt like a return of the Trojans kind of class. And there's a couple players that really stand out. And it's the nature of the way this went, because Corey Foreman, 5-star player, originally commits to Clemson, decommits from Clemson, kind of beginning pandemic, ends up signing with the Trojans. And then today, Rajon Davis, linebacker, 4-star linebacker, but really good player based on everything I can tell. He was committed to LSU, decommits from LSU, and decides to stay in California. So where USC was in a position where they were losing a lot of the top players in the state of California, well, they did a very, very good job in the state of California with this class. 13 players in the class right now. And as you mentioned, they are a top 10 class. They are the little piece of trivia that you threw out earlier. How many conferences actually have 2 top 10 teams? Well, Pac-12 is one of them. Thanks, because Oregon also had an absolutely killer class this year. they got things started early with Avante Dickerson. That's right. Well, 4-star cornerback. So USC has this like sort of resurgence feel on the recruiting trail where it seemed like they were able to take that 5-0 regular season. They were able to take the success that they had, especially I think about on the defensive side of the ball where they had just reworked the defensive staff. They just made a bunch of changes, and a name that I had not put my finger on yet that I know now from watching the 24/7 Sports show is Dante Williams, the associate head coach and the cornerbacks coach there. Steve Wiltfong said that Dante Williams is relentless. He was aggressive, and he got a lot of flowers from Wiltfong in terms of being the spearhead of bringing some California love back into this Trojans class. I mean, do you see it the same way, that this is really important? And how do you see USC that they got to this place where they're right back to where we're used to being in the top 10?
I do think it's really important for a number of reasons. First, for USC, they were 64th in recruiting last year. That is like not even close to their second worst finish ever. I have all their finishes here.
You shouldn't have to hit load more. That's my rule on it's like the load more standard is when you go through the 24/7 Sports team rankings. If I have to hit load more to get to your team, then it was not a good season.
How many times you have to click page down is usually an indication.
Got it out.
So USC was 64th in recruiting last year. Their average over 20 years is like 4th. So something was up, and their coaches did not have great relationships with some of the players. They had to do a better job with it. They went out and made some important staff changes. They were able to connect with their local recruits better. They got some guys, as you mentioned, who are real dogs on the trail, and they just absolutely came back and hit it out of the park. I think this is a major win for the Trojans. They pick up Rayshawn Davis today, a linebacker who I've seen a pretty good bit of on the national 7-on-7 circuit. You know, he was committed to LSU. He decommits, and I like him because I've seen him play a lot of 7-on, as has Greg Biggins. I know he mentioned this on the show today. I mean, he's a thicker kid, but he covers well in 7-on, and 7-on is where you get exposed in space. If you can't cover, you're going to get exposed in 7-on, and he does a nice job there. That's a pretty big get for them. I also think the Pac-12, for a long time, it trumpeted its kind of parity, right? And look at how balanced we are. Anybody can beat anybody. That's kind of okay for week-to-week excitement within the league, but that's not a way to get national respect. To get national respect, you need 2 dominant teams or 1 dominant team and everybody else to get the hell out of the way, right? Look at Florida State and Clemson when they were going back and forth in the ACC. Who was the third best team? At one of those years, you had Louisville. After that, you had a whole lot of crap for the most part. And nobody in the national media playoff committee didn't care.
We just called them the Louisville Lamars for that year because they went 7-1 and came like 4 yards short of maybe being able to beat Clemson, tied for an Atlantic Division title. But that team also lost to Houston. That team lost a couple of non-cons too. It's a very, very silly team. You're 100% right about that.
So if USC can emerge as the dominant power in the South, and if Oregon can keep this up in the North, then there's a decent chance, you get 2 top 10 level teams in the Pac-12 title game. That's something I want to watch. That's something the playoff committee wants to watch. That's how you get back to the playoff. And then once you start making the playoff, then your recruiting can get even better. Maybe one of these teams can threaten for, I don't want to say a number 1 class because obviously, Saban, but maybe a number 2 class at some point. This is a nice day for the Pac-12. By the way, Coca in our chat, our producer, Matt Coca, he says A&M did jump USC for 7th, and for sure.
How do you see everything sort of splitting up? Because I know another one, I don't want to cut you off. I know another one of your winners today, you said it was Michigan's done a pretty good job with this class. Michigan, as we're sitting here talking, I believe is up to number 10. Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, this is your top 3. LSU, Clemson, Oregon, 4 through 6. USC at 7. Texas A&M at 8. I guess Texas A&M over USC. Notre Dame 9. Michigan 10. Oklahoma, the top one out. Where do you start to draw those lines? Because I could just look at the points, but I don't know if you see it differently in terms of, where the steps down are within that group.
I would say the points are generally a pretty good indicator. And I'm not just saying that because I work for 24/7 Sports, but they are. Now, a couple things that I would note is you also need to take into account how many commitments a class has. If you see somebody who's pretty high, but yet they only have a commitment number in the teens, that's probably showing that their pound for pound class is really good. I would tier it. I mean, it's what, 245 on the East Coast right now, so we have a couple more kids left to go. This can change, and we'll see where JT goes, and JT can certainly change some things up. At present, Alabama's on its own tier. Right. I mean, they're the number one class of all time.
Right.
I think Ohio State's on its own tier. I think they're a pretty clear level up from Georgia. And I would say Georgia, LSU, Clemson are sort of on their own tier. Right. Clemson only has 19 commits. They're one of only 3 schools with an average player rating of 94 plus, along with obviously Bama and the Buckeyes. Then I would say there's probably a tier with like Oregon, USC, A&M. If that's fair, that they're all kind of in that similar range to me. Mm-hmm. All have 0 or 1 5-star, all have quite a few 4-star players. And then I think there's another drop off after that 6, 7, 8 of Oregon, A&M, USC to that Notre Dame, Michigan range where like they're not quite as good, but they're still very solid classes. Notre Dame actually took 27 guys this year, which is a very large high school class, for them. And then, you kind of get going down. Then it gets even harder because Oklahoma only took 16 players. Oklahoma is another one of these guys that said, you know what? We're kind of in win now mode. We like what we have coming back. We need to supplement our roster now with transfers. I think OU can take up to like 7 or 8 transfers based on the space they have.
Per player, they are better than number 4 LSU.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's to my point of you have to also consider the per player average, especially in a year where we have a much greater variance in terms of class size than we normally would. Normally, we don't see, some of these top 20 classes taking 15 kids and some taking 28. Usually the band of class size is tighter.
Interesting. Who else stood out from the winners and losers that we haven't gotten a chance to get to?
So we already hit A&M, who I think could be an even bigger winner if they're able to get Malone or the number 1 offensive tackle, who's going to decide on Friday morning. He's actually in Australia, so that'll be interesting. I got to figure out what 1 p.m. Australia time actually equates to. We talked about Michigan, how they're able to overcome all the Harbaugh issues, and they kept him, and they retooled their staff, and they had multiple flips along the defensive line today. They're running that Baltimore Ravens defense. We'll see how that works out, but the recruits certainly bought into it. So I think that was an important storyline there, winners wise. Jackson State, Deion school, 84th in the country. They picked up a lot of players who were at one point committed to Power 5 schools, and then I think we're pretty much told by those schools, hey, you don't have a spot any longer for whatever reason. I'm not going to speculate exactly why, because I don't think that the reason is necessarily the same for all of them. But maybe they have some guys who couldn't necessarily get into some of these Power 5 schools, but I've seen some of these guys they have, and they could play, right? Like if Deion can coach, and if they get all these guys into school, and they get them to all come together and play as a team, the base level of talent here is so far like above and away what a typical HBCU is able to get. I mean, I've seen Trevante Rucker. I've seen a lot of these guys they have, and it's just a different level of talent. Now we'll see if they can all coalesce, right? If this is a team of mercenaries, because they're taking 14 transfers, which is a ton. But I think that's going to be very interesting. And Coca just put in the chat that Barstool is doing a Last Chance U / Hard Knocks on that school this year, which is kind of what I figured would happen, because Deion was involved with Barstool, and then I know he wanted to get into coaching, and that's must-watch TV for me. To see all these kids I know try to all work together at that school.
I mean, if they want to send the Cover 3 podcast to go see what's up, we'll go be embedded and see what happens. Is it going to go the way of Prime Academy? I hope not. Like, is it going to go like, is he going to be able to coalesce? Is he going to be able to coach? I think those are all very important questions. Another coconut from earlier, Jackson State, one spot ahead of South Carolina in the current rankings right now. I would love to see Jackson State with Deion be successful, because to have it be, and I think that I don't know what I would define as successful, but to have it be all promise and no delivery would be a little bit of a bummer, and not necessarily good. Like for it to be a sideshow, I think would be really, really disappointing for the hire in general. And then also just sort of the future of some of those conferences.
Yeah. And I don't have any indication that it is, something that they're just doing for TV purposes. I really hope, that these kids are making the right choice, and that Deion and his staff are able to coach them up. By the way, South Carolina did pass them up just now. They picked up a 13th commit. So to our point from earlier, the Gamecocks only have 13 commits, which on the one hand, like, didn't you fire Muschamp way early in the season, in the cycle, so you could get somebody in and start to recruit? So from that perspective, they kind of failed.
And didn't everybody leave? Like,
yeah.
Didn't they have a lot of scholarships available?
They did. And they also had some coaches leave, I think, who they tried to hire, and, they ended up bouncing elsewhere. But I will say that it also feels like they kind of punted a little bit. They'll be able to take a much larger class next year after hopefully being able to see some of these kids in person. And they also have a lot of room for transfers. I don't think, having a different approach here is bad at all. I think it's kind of smart, actually.
You mentioned earlier having the administration on board, like it is a case by case basis, from what I understand from talking to you and being, on the consuming as much of this information as possible. It's always a little bit of a crash course for me going into and being on National Signing Day, but the way that we have to change our expectations from program to program and actually look maybe even under some rocks behind the scenes and try and figure out, what the game plan is. It really is a National Signing Day unlike any other.
It is. And so this is something that is multifaceted, right? So, but I think it's really important to the sport of college football. And so I'm going to just explain this for the listeners. This is a little bit long-winded, but I'm going to try to just break it down like I did before the show. So for 2021, the NCAA has said these guys who were 2020 seniors, they can come back and play an extra year due to COVID. It was the NCAA's capitulation to the players to say, hey, if you play this year and you only get to play 3 games or something, you're not going to lose a year of eligibility. Everybody gets to come back free, because at one point the players weren't sure if they wanted to play, or at least some of them weren't. So that's awesome. And I fully support their being willing to come back and excuse me, and able to come back. Now, the issue is they don't count against the 85 scholarship cap at all. Like, they're basically, they don't exist basically for your accounting purposes, according to the NCAA. But the money you spend on their scholarships is real. And for a lot of administrations out there, they are telling their staffs privately, and these are mostly group of 5 schools, but a couple Power 5s as well. They're saying, guys, no, we're not going over 85. I know the NCAA says you can, but it doesn't mean that we will. Like, so pick which super seniors, if you will, you want to come back. And for each one you take back, that is one fewer high school player you can sign. So that's one major reason, I think, why a lot of these high school classes this year are so small. And I was doing some back of the napkin math. We're going to have a couple hundred fewer Division I signees this year, Chip, than we normally are.
But does that make like the group of 5 better? Do they get bumped down to FCS? Like, do those?
I think there's trickle down to G5, and I definitely think there's some trickle down to FCS for sure. And we also know junior colleges are being more and more picky this year. Like, we've been hearing from junior college coaches that they are, like, the grades that the junior colleges are taking this year are higher than normal, because you're having some kids with pretty okay grades relative to normal get in and say, hey, Coach, I don't have the spot. I'm just going to go to JUCO and wait it out. The other reason why we're having such small classes is because of the portal, right? You have all these kids jumping into the portal because they know that they're going to be immediately eligible in the fall. And so if every school out there saves 2 spots for the portal, that's 260 fewer kids than you can normally sign in a recruiting class. And if, let's say, I don't know, a third of the schools out there are told, hey, you can't exceed the 85, and they each want to take, 2 super seniors back, right? Well, a third of, of 130 is like what, 40 something, double that. So it's like 90. So you're looking at, 250 and 90. Let's just call it 350 kids whose spots are going to be filled either by returning super seniors, COVID seniors, I guess maybe a better term, or transfer portal candidates. Like, so that is creating quite the scholarship crunch. And next year, by the way, I'm about to write on this for 24/7 Sports. Next year, the NCAA is probably not going to leave it up to the schools if they want to bring back, in excess of 85. Next year, they're going to say, hey, you can bring them back, but they're going to count against the 85, which is going to create an across the board crunch. So we are not out of the woods here on this by a long shot.
Jeez.
Does that make sense? I know there's some math there and some kind of bylaw stuff, but.
No, I don't think it's a bylaw. I mean, anybody who's recruited on NCAA football has had to cut a 5-star because you've recruited too many 5-stars.
Yeah.
When it's time to cut player rosters, I remember on the game, it's down to 70, and I'd always come in with 79 players, and I'd be like, well, shoot, sorry. I understand that that the game says you're a gem according to my great scouting, but you're the lowest ranked player on this roster. You got to go. Now, the scholarship crunch, I think a good amount of fans understand it.
Okay, cool.
For sure. All right. Anything else before we get out of here?
Not really. If you guys want to have some fun, I don't know where he's going to sign yet. Probably Ole Miss or A&M. Long shot, Florida State. Go pull up Tywone Malone's baseball clips. Those are fun. This dude.
He said he's 3. Yeah, because he's 310. He can hit.
Yeah. He's like legit, 300. Like think if Mo Vaughn was in a little bit better shape. That's a throwback name. He's got some exit velocity for sure.
For sure. You can follow him on Twitter at Bud Elliott 3. You can follow me at Chip_Patterson. As always, 24/7 Sports is your home for all things recruiting. The 2022 cycle, news breaking today, so it's already off and running. So be sure that you go and get a 24/7 Sports subscription. Go find your favorite team site and listen to their team podcast as well. Bud, thank you very much.
Enjoy it, Chip.